The term Renaulution is being thrown around in the press by Renault as they try to claw back some of the dominance over the market that they once had. At the height of their success, Renault was one of the most dominant companies in Europe, selling family cars by the bucket load. Truth be told, they've lost their way a bit in recent years as far as sales go. The key for them is to tap into their family car know-how by making electric cars for the masses, and in particular, electric SUVs. So what is their expertise in cars for all the family? Well, Renault can claim they have drastically shaped the family car market by producing many innovative and milestone family vehicles. In this video, I'll look at some of their key developments and the wider impact they had on the market. As always, if you enjoy, please like and subscribe and let me know what you'd like to see next. First of all, Renault can lay claim to one of the most revolutionary inventions in the car industry, let alone family cars. The car in question is the Renault 4. It was first marketed as a small estate, but its boot design was clearly that of a hatchback. It was also the first front-wheel drive family car made by Renault, something that is now common amongst hatchbacks. The 4 was launched during a period of economic growth in France, which saw growing car ownership figures, and the first million were made in less than 5 years, with 8 million being made in total across its 30-year spell. So, what was the Renault 4? Well, it was Renault's answer to the Citroën 2CV, which was becoming long in the tooth, and the expansion of towns and cities meant the 2CV's popularity was waning. Development of a car to replace the Renault 4 CV began in 1956, and the 4 had shared many traits. It had fully independent suspension, a simple body, and a large storage space. It, however, had a larger 4-cylinder water-cooled engine, making it faster and more refined than the 2CV. A more basic model, the Renault 3, was offered at launch as well, but the 4 was much more popular. The fourgonette van was a popular special model and became ubiquitous as bakers snapped them up. The Renault 4 lost its way during the 1980s as it was killed off by safety regulations, but production continued mainly outside of Europe until the 1990s. The Renault 4 was such a success that it kick-started Renault as a mainstream brand outside of their native France and provided a new level of practicality for families across the globe. It's even made such an impact that it will return under a new guise, although more on that later. Another revolutionary Renault was the 16. Based on the Citroën Traction Avant, it introduced the hatchback shape to the mid-size segment. Production began in March 1965. It was front-wheel drive and had an inline 4-cylinder mounted behind the transmission. Like the Renault 4, it had an uneven wheelbase left and right to accommodate the torsion bar suspension. The column-mounted gear stick provided more interior space, something vital for family cars. The Renault 16 was a success, with over 1.8 million being made across 15 years. In particular, it was introduced in Britain and helped to introduce imported cars at a time when British cars still ruled the roads of Britain. It wasn't as big of a success as the Renault 4 that came before it, but still added something previously unseen to the family car market, making it deserving of a mention in this video. Perhaps the biggest change to the family car market came when Renault invented the MPV with the Espace. A giant wedge of a car, the concept of the Espace was conceived by designer Frank Pollock and was spearheaded by Antonis Valonis, another designer. One was developed at Chrysler using Simca parts. PSA rejected the idea when they bought Chrysler, as they believed it was too expensive and too risky. It returned to Matra, who brought the idea to Renault. It used longitudinally mounted inline 4s, and Renault insisted that the floor was flat for maximum practicality. It used a fiberglass body to save money and weight. The Espace was launched in 1984 and had a slow start, with just 9 being sold in the first month. Sales then picked up as consumers realised how practical it was at 4.25 metres in length. After its success, it was facelifted in 1988, with new headlights being the main change. The second generation of the Espace built on the success of its predecessor and came in 1991, with styling more in line with other Renaults. The interior was improved, but the chassis was left unchanged. The option of the PRV V6 with around 150 horsepower was added, but there weren't too many other dramatic changes. Famously, this generation of Espace was responsible for Wild Espace F1, celebrating 10 years of the MPV and Renault's involvement in Formula 1. The body was made to look like the Espace, but was bespoke, and the F1 used the V10 engine from the 1993 Williams FW15C, which had 690 horsepower. A mental 0 to 62 time of 2.8 seconds was possible due to this, and carbon ceramic brakes meant it could stop incredibly quickly. The third and fourth generations of the Espace were also successful, but saw a shift upmarket and slightly away from the original formula. The demise of MPVs and the success of crossovers has since seen the Espace become a crossbreed between MPV and crossover, and it's never really recovered from families ditching long, boxy MPVs. Another revolutionary MPV made by Renault was the Scenic. It was the first small MPV, and to achieve that feat, it used the Megane platform. Development of this began with the 1991 Scenic concept, though the production model looked drastically different. Speaking of the first generation production car, it was launched in 1996. Smaller than the Espace, it still offered great practicality, was a hit, with Renault making nearly 2,500 Scenics a day at its peak. Mechanically, it shared a lot with a hatchback range, with a range of inline fours being offered, as well as the choice between manual and automatic. Independent seats meant it was easy to adjust the interior depending on its use. The facelift brought the design in line with the rest of the Renault range and brought small improvements mainly to the interior. In 2000, Renault also launched a four-wheel drive crossover variant named the Scenic RX4. It was pretty dire, only 40,000 were ever made due to their poor reliability. The second Scenic was launched in 2003 and the Grand Scenic followed in 2004. This new model had a longer wheelbase and bigger boots, which also featured two folding seats. It received most of the tech featured in the new Megane and other Renaults, but also gained practical family features such as removable rear seats, which could also be folded, an integrated table, and a childminder mirror. The engines offered were pretty similar to the first Scenic, and the facelift brought design changes. The third generation brought new tech that became standard across the Renault range, as well as the designs. The fourth generation would veer off into becoming a crossover MPV mashup, like the Espace before being axed. It returned as an electric crossover this year. Perhaps Renault's most relevant decision today is their purchase of Dacia in 1999. It took a while for it to make a difference across the major European markets, but for the last decade or so, Dacia has been making some of the best budget cars on sale. In particular, the Duster has picked up a great reputation as no-nonsense family transport at an affordable price. The more recent Jogger is Britain's cheapest 7-seater by a country mile, and is probably the best value car on sale right now, with prices starting at around £19,000. The next generation of Dacia recently began with the release of the electric Spring, and it will be interesting to see how cheap Dacia will be able to sell a larger, more family-oriented EV. On the topic of EVs, Renault has been pumping them out recently. The Scenic, as previously mentioned, recently became available as an all-electric crossover, and the recent releases of the electric Symbios and hybrid Rafale show Renault is going all in on electrified SUVs. The upcoming Renault 4 will be a small crossover aimed more at city driving, but you can bet your bottom dollar Renault has extracted every single ounce of practicality out of it. So there we have it. That's a brief look at Renault's history of family car innovations, which is heading in a new direction with plenty of EVs soon going into production.